Assalamu alaikum dear students. This is your teacher Irfan Majid Bhatt from High School Mandigam. Let's discuss an important life process, that is photosynthesis. It is the most important process on earth and the main source of the energy for all the living organisms, in which the plants manufacture, green plants rather, manufacture their own food from inorganic raw materials like carbon dioxide and water by the help of the sunlight and chlorophyll to produce glucose and oxygen. You might have seen that the green plants have green leaves because they reflect the green light and they absorb all other colors into the leaves and they power the photosynthesis. In this graph we can see, for instance, this graph shows the wavelengths of the light that most power photosynthesis. Note there is a peak at 400 nanometers, that is the blue color, and another peak at 700 nanometers, that is the wavelength of red. So blue light and red light are most stimulating for the process of photosynthesis. Ironically, the color green around 550 nanometers is reflected, and very much lesser quantity of it is absorbed. So that's why leaves appear green. Now we'll look at the general definition of the photosynthesis. It is the process that converts solar energy into glucose. And you can see the formula here, the reaction here, carbon dioxide and water. They are the reactants, and by the help of the sunlight they produce sugars like glucose and oxygen. Now, who performs photosynthesis? These are the autotrophs, but we typically think of the plants, but they are not the only ones. There are algae, there are phytoplanktons, and then there are kelps, which are the brown algae underwater, and even some bacteria like cyanobacteria. They are the photosynthetic ones. Now, we can say that photosynthesis is also an endergonic chemical reaction. It means it requires an input of energy from sunlight, because sunlight is the input of energy here, which powers photosynthesis. Even we talk about the end results, it creates oxygen as a waste gas and simple sugars like glucose. If we zoom on the leaf, we find some peculiar pores on the side. These pores, they open and close, are called stomata, and they exchange the gases. Like they take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they produce oxygen as a waste through these stomata openings. They give off the oxygen. So it is through these pores they exchange gases with the atmosphere. Now let's introduce the structure in cells that allows them to do photosynthesis, which is called the chloroplast. This here we will divide the photosynthesis in two stages. That is the first stage, light-dependent reaction, which needs light. It takes place in the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast. We can see in a diagram here the thylakoids, which look like coins stacked on one another. In the membrane of these thylakoids, that's where the light reaction takes place. And these thylakoids, the stalk of these thylakoids is called granum. Now let's look that black box. I just want to zoom in that. You can see some things actually embedded within the membranes of thylakoids. You can label them as PS1 and PS2, photosystem first and photosystem second. They are the reaction centers or the trap centers. In these photosystems, you can find chlorophyll and protein molecules for capturing and transferring energy during the light-dependent reactions. And the oxygen, ATP, and NADPH is also created. We'll talk about them in detail very shortly. Then the second stage, stage 2, that is the light-independent reaction. It takes place in the stroma, which is the matrix actually, or the fluid-like substance outside the thylakoids. And here glucose is created, glucose is formed. So let's talk about these two stages. Now let us see towards here in the diagram. In the light-dependent reaction, the step number 1 goes like this. Chlorophyll in photosystem number 2 will absorb sunlight, even though it is called a photosystem 2, but it is actually because it was discovered after photosystem first, but it is the photosystem which firstly absorbs the sunlight and the electrons are released from it. So here you can see sunlight is striking the photosystem number 2. This causes the electrons to become excited, and electrons actually flow into the thylakoid membrane. As these electrons, they flow from photosystem 2 through thylakoid membrane to photosystem 1, it makes the membrane negatively charged. There are also the proteins embedded there in the membrane. You can just see here the electrons flowing. This also starts an electron transport chain, or the chain of events. Now here in the second step, there are some hydrogen ions in the stroma. These hydrogen ions, they play an important role. So what happens as the electrons move through the thylakoid membranes, they also turn on, the protein pump will be turned on. The hydrogen ions will be pulled inside the thylakoids. As you can see here, they got pulled inside, and large concentration of hydrogen ions will be there inside the thylakoid. Now, water molecules are also broken. Here you can see water molecules, and with the help of enzymes, the hydrogens are broken off, and the electrons are they are just pushed into photosystem second, and enzymes will break up the hydrogen, and electrons are pushed once again into the photosystem number 2, because the photosystem number 2 has been losing electrons. So it is the water, hydrogen of the water, that will replenish the electrons for photosystem number 2, and the process will keep going. Also now the oxygen, you can see O, oxygen of the water, it will bond with another oxygen to form O2. The oxygen that we breathe, it used to attach with water, so it comes from water. Now we can move on into the next step. Again, step number 3. Again, the sunlight is striking photosystem number 2. Electrons are moving through the thylakoid membrane, but the sunlight is striking the photosystem number 1. And the photosystem number 1, it has chlorophyll, and here also electrons become excited. They move through the thylakoid membranes here, as you can see here, through the electron transport chain. Now, the 4th step is that these electrons, they help bond NADP positive and H positive to create NADPH. So NADPH is the reduced form of the NADP, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, and it is used later in the dark reaction. I will just come back to it later on in the second stage. So this is how NADPH is created. Now at this stage, the hydrogen is getting accumulated inside the thylakoid from breaking of the water, photolysis of the water, and hydrogens from outside, that's from stroma. There is a large concentration of hydrogens inside the thylakoid, as you can see here. Now, the next step, or the 5th step, will we'll just see here, hydrogens will diffuse now through the stroma or through that enzyme ATP synthase. You can see here ATP synthase enzyme. It will diffuse through ATP synthase, and it will help to bond a molecule of ADP, adenosine diphosphate, with another phosphate to create ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate. Now this ATP along with NADPH, it makes an assimilatory pair. It is the energy source for the dark reaction to take place. So now we can summarize the light dependent reaction here. Oxygen, NADPH, ATP, they're created. Sunlight was taken in, water was taken in, oxygen was released as a waste, and here in a light-dependent reaction, NADPH and ATP have been created. So this is also called as the assimilatory pair, but no glucose has been created yet. Now let's move towards the light-independent reactions. In the light-independent reactions, or also called as the Kelvin cycle, named after the scientist who helped to identify these steps, we will just start. First of all, there is a 5-carbon molecule, RUBP, ribulose biphosphate, which is present in the stroma or the matrix. It has just 5 carbons, as you can see here, but its formula is C5H12O11P2. Now what happens? RUBP bonds with the molecules of the carbon dioxide. It makes a very short-lived 6-carbon molecule, and now it is a very short-lived molecule. It will break down. The reason is the role behind its short-living is played by ATP and NADPH. The 6-carbon molecule is broken down by ATP and NADPH, and also there are some enzymes who helps to break down of the 6-carbon molecule into 2 molecules of 3 carbon each, called phosphoglycerate or PGA. They are the 3 carbon molecules. So now NADPH is broken down into NADP, and ATP is broken down into ADP. Now, what happens? It happens so many times. A short-lived 6-carbon molecule is formed, and then it is broken down again into 2 more molecules of phosphoglycerate or PGA. Then another molecule of 6-carbon compound is broken down again into 2 phosphoglycerates. So now what happens? What happens with these phosphoglycerates? Some of those 3-carbon phosphoglycerates are going to bond with one another by the help of enzymes to make a simple sugar called the glucose, which is C6H12O6, and that is the aim of the photosynthesis. Now, all the phosphoglycerates will not do it. Some of the phosphoglycerates will help the cycle keep going, and some of the phosphoglycerates will be broken down. Now, other 3-carbon molecules will recombine to make 5-carbon molecule again, which is called the ribulose biphosphate or RUBP. Now we are repeating the Kelvin cycle. So process just restarts, because carbon dioxide will again bond with 5-carbon RUBP, and again a short-lived 6-carbon molecule is formed, and the process repeats itself. So let us summarize the light-independent reaction. Carbon dioxide, ADP, and NADPH are created in light-independent